How the Adult Angels Wanted to Cancel Christmas. Welcome to the Priceless Podcast. Hello and welcome everyone. Today with a maybe Christmas special, we could call it. I have a new guest and he comes from Germany. His name is Axel Schwaigert, and he will actually talk a little bit about his Christmas book, or better to say Christmas books. Hello, Axel. How are you? And welcome to the Priceless Podcast.
Hello, Michael. Thank you for having me on your show. And I'm actually well. I'm looking forward to Christmas, and I'm in Christmas stress and hectic as everybody else. So this is a typical time before Christmas, I guess.
Yes, and you are a pastor. I'm going to ask you to say a little bit more about you. But first, I want to thank you for taking the time in this crazy times for pastors. So thank you for being with us here for the viewers and for the listeners. Before we start talking about the books, can you say a few words about yourself, who you are, what you do, or whatever you would like our listeners and viewers to know about you?
Well, I'm the pastor of Metropolitan Community Churches here in Stuttgart. I think that's the most important thing to start with in relationship to the books. Metropolitan Community Church is an international denomination that mainly serves the gay and lesbian community. Or actually, in reality, we are a church for all and for everybody. Our roots are in the LGBT community. In 1968, we were founded in the United States because at that time there was no other church where people who identified as LGBTQ plus and as people of faith could go. So that's where it started. And since then it grew in a international multi-language church. And here in Germany, we have 3 of our congregations, one in Hamburg, one in Cologne, and this one where I serve as a pastor since 20 years in Stuttgart. I studied in Tübingen University. I'm a classically trained Lutheran theologian. I have a degree in pastoral theology from an Anglican university in the United States. I have a doctorate in ministry. So this is basically my background in church. And in this church, all those stories we are going to talk about developed. So it is important to talk about the church and about the congregation.
I think that this introduction of yours is already a little teaser, because I am so happy to announce to the viewers and listeners that you actually agreed to another interview that we're going to do, where you can find out a little bit more about MCC, how it all started, what is it doing, where is it doing it, why is it doing it, and so on and so on. But we'll talk about that after Christmas, we agreed, when this craziness calms a little bit down.
Absolutely, and there will be a lot of queer history in it and queer things. So I'm looking forward to that podcast too.
Oh, great. Now I'm all excited. I can't wait. And I hope you viewers and listeners also are excited about this, which will happen sometime next year. But this was a little teaser. So let's go to your book. I already mentioned the title. I hope I'll be able to repeat it. So how the Adult Angels wanted to cancel Christmas?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you say a little bit for the viewers and listeners who maybe didn't read or didn't have a chance to read your book, what it is about?
Well, Christmas is a difficult time for us preachers because it's a very narrow story base where we can draw from. It's just about the birth of Christ. So we have to again and again come up with something to talk and to preach. And there is always the I would say, temptation to talk theologically about it. There is so much in it about incarnation, about what does it mean that God becomes a human and is born in a certain time, in a certain culture, to a certain language, in a certain bodily form as a man. So there are many, many, many of those questions. The reality also is that nobody actually is in the mood to listen to a sermon like that on Christmas. I just told my congregation the other night and said, one day I will do this systematic theological sermon about incarnational theology, and they all looked in utter shock and horror at me and said, no, please, no, don't do this, because people always think it's boring. And that is how those stories started. Many years ago, we had Christmas. We don't have our own premises. We don't own a building or something like that. So we rent a little room. And of course, it's always difficult to do stuff on a day when you don't rent the room, usually Saturday evenings. So for a long time, we didn't do Holy Night service because we just didn't have a room at the inn, so to speak. And one year it happened that our Saturday evening service, our normal weekly service, happened to be on Holy Night. And that's when the first story developed, because I thought, well, I just need to tell them something that engages them and is a little bit funny and a little bit interesting. And I came up with the first of those stories, which is the story about how the adult angels wanted to cancel Christmas. So I always try to approach this very deep, mystical thing that we call a birth, and we call the birth of God in this world, in a way that answers the question, what does it have to do with me? Because that's what a sermon should do. It always needs to answer, what does it have to do with me? What does it have to do with me, a gay male pastor living in the 20th century in Stuttgart, Germany? What is the connection to the birth of a Jewish rabbi some 2,000 years ago in a little village called Bethlehem, in a then occupied by a strange military force occupied country? What does it have to do with me? And bless you. And
thank you.
And that's when those stories come into play, because I needed something that connects us to them. And for me, the angels are a perfect vehicle to actually do it, because I can have the angel do all kinds of strange things that other people wouldn't do.
Yeah.
Like canceling Christmas.
Yeah, and it's actually quite fun. Thank you for sending me the text so I could read it, and it's really fun. And what I told you when we actually talked before this interview is that I like the way you approached it in making them more human. That's one thing, and that's not only in this book but also in the other book that you sent me. What was the motivation? Like, you are talking about this story, but you wrote more stories, and there is another book. It's unfortunately only in German. What was the motivation for that, to continue publishing other books with stories about Christmas?
Well, after a while, when I realized those stories about the angels came to a point where it's always the question about fresh and new ideas. With the angels, the stories are really how does heaven try to approach us, how to come to us. For example, that story about the adult angels is that the adult angels decide not to do Christmas anymore because nobody on our earth cares anymore. So why should they care? So they decide to go on a holiday instead, to the Bahamas or to Hawaii. Yeah. It's supposed to be quite nice there this kind of year. So that's the starting premise. And then three little angels start to decide, no, that this can't be it. We need to go to Earth. And in going to Earth, they realize it's not about the big theological things. It's about a sign of peace. So one angel flies to a place where people fight, and a dead tree starts to bloom because the angel is there, and the people living there realize, oh, this sign of blooming in a dead tree is a sign of hope. And we sit there, and instead of screaming at each other, we say shalom and salam, which is both the same word. It both means peace. The other angel gives an old couple who just lives in cold neglect of each other memories of their past, and they realize there is something called love in them, and they decide to celebrate. So trying to engage what is the presence of Christmas, that was the idea for the angel stories. But again, make it in a way that it connects to us humans, because I think a lot of people can understand there are places where there is no peace and we need a sign of peace. That's something people can realize. If I tell them about what does it mean that the angels sing and peace on earth to all men of goodwill and glory to God, I can make a huge theological statement about that. But that doesn't connect to people in a way a blooming dead tree would do. So that's how those stories started, and that's the angels, and they are very funny and whimsical and stupid sometimes because they don't get it. In most of the story, at the end, Jesus comes and explains everything and just says, "Oh, you angels and you saints, please, don't you get it? Don't you remember what you did in the original night? Are you really sure you want to cancel Christmas because it's not perfect on Earth? Christmas is not perfect. This is what we all know." So that's the approach. And of course, there I don't even need to go too much into the gay and lesbian issues and into the LGBT issues. So far, I haven't found a gay angel, but of course, they all are queer in some way, in a very heavenly way, and people, I think, can hear that in a story much more than in theology.
Mm. Well, I guess like in the second book, you have actually a gay couple in the stories. Yeah. One thing I really found interesting, for example, you just mentioned this part of one little angel coming to these two neighbors who have a tree together, and you realize that one is probably Jewish and the other is Muslim. You incorporated into this interreligious reality into the book, and also from what I got in the stories of your second book, there are also kind of some refugees, some immigrants who are there. I don't really even know how to ask this question, because that's one thing I really liked. Is this something very close to you, something very important, or what does that speak about you?
Yes, that is very important. It's actually about the people who are there, who are in my church, who are in the place where I live. Look, when I grew up, I wanted to be the pastor in a little village. That's where my first, what do you call that, a placement or internship. My first internship was in a tiny little village somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and I absolutely loved it. I just loved it, and I thought, oh yeah, that's what I want to be. And then I had my coming out, and it was very clear that a tiny little village in the Lutheran church wouldn't be in my future. And so I ended up serving a small gay and lesbian community in a big city, in Stuttgart, which is, for the country boy that I am, a big city. And I realized, in reality, it's the same people. It's just on a different scale and differently organized, but it's normal, usual people who just try to work, just have their daily worries. They just come home from work, need to go shopping, do their washing, and that's the people we are. And to them, I need to tell the story, and I have to come up with stories that they can relate to, where they find themselves into. So the second book developed around a little character who is called the Little Saint. He doesn't have a name, he's just the Little Saint. And he is exactly sent to the margins of a big city where he's supposed to do whatever little saints do. And he has to find that out for himself. And he meets people. He meets an old lady from across the hallway. He meets those two young men who live in a shared accommodation, and he always had his suspicions about them. And it becomes in a later story quite clear that they are and there is this family of refuge. And the reality is, we all know these people. We all know the little old lady from next door. We all know this gay or lesbian couple. We all know a family of refuge which lives close by, and we've never talked to them. We don't even know their name. So when they happen to come up in a story, it suddenly makes sense, because you are meant, because, oh yeah, I know all those people. I know that situation. I understand. Or when the little saint just is so much in hectic that he has no time to prepare a sermon, then that's exactly how we are now, being in hectic, doing a Christmas special of a podcast and have not prepared all the questions, and immediately connects. And that's what a good sermon needs to do. It needs to connect what is our faith telling us with the reality of our world. And that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and for all of you who are watching this and are wondering what is the other book, you actually read one of your stories. You translated it really quickly in a very short amount of time into English, and agreed to read it for you so you can listen to it and just enjoy a little bit of the magic of Christmas in this story with the little saint. Who are these stories for?
They are basically for everybody. They are children's stories for adults, or adult stories for children. I've never figured that out. But they are for everybody, and they are for everybody, not only for people who would go to church. You can read them without too much of churchiness in them. I don't have a missionary streak in me. I don't want to go out and convert people or something like that. That just doesn't work. I just hate it when people stand in our main street and shout Bible verses at people. I always want to go to them and say, can you please stop? You are actually making my work as a pastor much harder, because they all think I'm as crazy as you. Go to a care home and read the newspaper to an old lady who is blind. That is much more Christian than standing here trying to scare people to accept Jesus as whatever. That just doesn't work. So those stories are not to make Christians or some crazy things like that. It's just to, in a funny way, tell the story about Christmas again and again, that God wants to be with us, and he wants to be with you and your partner, whatever gender or sexuality your partner has. He wants to be with you with all your struggles. You don't need to be perfect. Quite the opposite. God knows that you are not perfect, but he loves you because of how you are. And that's the story. And so, yes, it's children books for adults, for everybody.
Thank you for saying that. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about the books, but you think this is really important for the people to know?
Well, I wish I had the time to translate the second one, which you are going to hear one story of in its eternity. And I want to, at that point, apologize for my bad English. English is not my first language, so it sometimes sounds much more like the broad Swabian dialect I usually talk than English. But I hope people will understand it and enjoy it a little bit and realize that Christmas is where you, the listeners, are making it. It's not happening in the big cathedral. It's not happening because some pastor says it. It's not happening because it's that time of the year. It happens because you are going to do it. And that's, I think, the most important thing.
Yes. And I think concerning the language, I think that's exactly kind of part of this story. You know, you have some immigrants in the story, so they wouldn't speak perfect, or I think in the story they don't even speak German. They don't really understand.
Not really well.
Yeah,
they learn in later stories, but really struggle.
Yeah, so you know that's it. That's the spirit of Christmas. So I encourage you to listen to the story and just get into the spirit of Christmas and and just enjoy it. Where can people get the books? Where can they find them?
Well, I don't dare to say, but in all those internet places where you can buy books whose name I'm not going to tell because I don't want to do any advertising. Go to your local bookshop and order it. You can order it in any bookshop that you want to go to, or you write an email to me and I will send you one.
Well, I will definitely put the titles in the podcast description so you can look at them and you can just search them and search for them in the internet and find or go to your local bookstore and order them. Thank you, Axel. I am so happy that this is not the last interview that we're going to do. I enjoy talking to you. I like what you're saying. I like that you're not proselytizing people. Where were you 30 years ago?
I was a young boy at that point.
I know. I'm sorry. I needed some people back then, but let's not go into that story.
I know.
You too.
Absolutely. I believed I was the only gay man and the only gay Christian around, and it was not fun. It was not fun.
Yeah, it was before the internet.
Absolutely.
Yes, it was the same for me. So I totally understand. Well, thank you, dear viewers and listeners, for being with us. I had fun. I hope you had fun too. We'll be back with more about MCC with Axel sometime next year. So at the end of this, I wish you a blessed Christmas, a happy New Year, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again. So until then, bye everyone. Bye, Axel.
Bye. Yeah.